Good evening and welcome to the SVG-TV news for Friday, March 18th. I'm Khalil Kato with the details. A local economist and lecturer at the University of the West Indies, Dr. Delano de Souza, says there is little government can do to protect Vincentians from the economic fallout of the Russia-Ukraine war. Speaking to SVG-TV News from the Cave Hill campus, Dr. de Souza says the country cannot escape the rise in food and food prices occurring globally, considering the island is heavily dependent on food imports. However, he said the Gonzalez administration can adopt fiscal policies being used in other Caribbean countries in order to give Vincentians some relief.
Given the fiscal space of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we've seen, as we know, we're recovering from not only the pandemic, but also the last eruption last year. And so that obviously means that we're now creeping back into full swing in many respects. We haven't even gotten there. So it's difficult for a country, a small island like St. Vincent and the Grenadines, to try to be as proactive as perhaps some other islands are. So if we think about things such as a reduction in VAT, I don't necessarily see that happening. Of course, we recognize under this administration, VAT has gone up. And so we don't expect that there's going to be a reduction in VAT. They could perhaps do like what the Barbados government has announced this week. Of course, Prime Minister Mia Mottley would have announced an addition in terms of zero-rated items, sanitary napkins and personal hygiene, commodities and so on. So perhaps that could provide some element of relief.
Dr. de Souza also said that those at the lower end of the income scale will be hardest hit by the changes in the global markets.
I think one of the difficult things about those lower income groups in particular, they tend to consume a certain commodities in high quantities. So, for example, flour, so they might consume a lot of bread. And so, those sort of commodities that are almost everyday staples in terms of their diet. Whereas others now on the higher income bracket, for example, would, might not necessarily be consuming as much bread, might not be consuming as much flour and different commodities. So it really does matter in terms of where you are in terms of the income bracket. Those on the lower end of the income bracket, they are definitely going to be affected by increases in basic commodities like flour, like bread, and so things that they rely on heavily. What you would expect as well from that is you're going to see sort of a rearrangement in terms of what they consume. So even if they had some elements in their supermarket lists before, you might see them shifting towards cheaper items, towards more inferior items, towards less healthy items, which is something that we always have to bear in mind.
Lead counsel representing the public sector workers who have brought a case against the government, Cara Shillingford Marsh, said a court victory could result in a rehiring of the dismissed workers. The unions are preparing for a second trial in the High Court to contest the dismissal of public sector workers who did not comply with the government's COVID-19 vaccination mandate implemented in the Public Health Act in December last year. Speaking via Zoom at a news conference on Thursday, Shillingford Marsh gave union members some hope as they prepare to head back to court in April.
If the decision is delivered in our favor, then the judge will hold, that is, if she decides in our favor, that the decision taken by the public service union, etc., was illegal and that it is null and void. The High Court has the power to quash decisions which are taken by public bodies or public authorities if those decisions are illegal. Now, once a decision is quashed, it's as though that decision was never made. So you go back to how it was before the decision was made, before the letters were sent out. So in essence, yes, if the case is successful, then the applicants will have their jobs back.
Shillingford Marsh said the submission for judicial review will be filed by next week.
Most persons are aware on the 10th of March 2022, leave was granted to 6 individuals to apply for judicial review of the decision of the Minister of Health to issue a certain statutory regulation that in effect terminated the employment of certain public servants, teachers, police officers in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. This is a decision which we are, of course, very happy with. We will therefore be filing a fixed date claim form, applying for judicial review and also for constitutional relief on behalf of the affected individuals within the next week.
Meanwhile, Industrial Relations and Research Officer of the SVG Teachers Union, Andrew John, said he believes the move by the government to reinstate sanitation workers should also be applied to teachers and other affected public sector workers. Earlier this month, the Minister of Health and Environment, Sinclair Jimmy Prince, admitted an error was made when sanitation workers were classified as frontline workers, which resulted in some being removed from their posts. The health minister said the sanitation workers are to be reinstated and will receive monies owed to them. At Thursday's news conference, John called on government to drop the court case and provide the other affected workers with similar treatment.
I think they should just go right ahead and admit that the whole issue was a mistake and reinstate our workers, because what is good for one group, of course, must be good for all. And I think it would be really a wise decision on the part of the authorities to just step back from this issue. It's not looking good. So I'm really hoping that they could take the bold step which needs to be taken and remove this matter before the courts even continue, and let us get back to a dignified state that we are.
And the SVG Teachers Union has expressed concerns about the readiness of fifth form students as they prepare for the upcoming regional examinations. SVGTU President Oswald Robinson told SVG-TV News that he was made aware of a vacancy notice being circulated recently, which showed that a number of schools across the island were without Form 4 and 5 teachers. He said that it is clear the ministry is having difficulties filling the positions left open by the teachers who refuse to comply with the government's COVID-19 vaccination mandate, noting that the number of teachers who were removed is close to 200. Robinson said it was unreasonable to expect students to perform well in the May-June Caribbean Examinations Council CXC examinations.
And a vacancy sent out by the Ministry of Education where 8 schools, and when I calculated the number of subject areas in those 8 schools, it amounted to 13 who do not have teachers for like principles of accounts, history, maths, biology, arts, a whole range of subject areas. Are the students now that have to go and write CXC in May. And I have been getting reports from teachers who have been fired. A lot of them are Form 5 teachers, that their students have been communicating with them. I've seen some of the messages that they are not being taught. Some of these people they put in the classrooms to teach, they do not have the skill set to deal with the SBAs and to adequately prepare the students.
Commenting on the vacancy notice, Minister of Education Curtis King told SVG-TV News there are some schools where the ministry is seeking to fill positions.
As you can see from that particular ad, it was not a large number. We have generally covered all the positions that would have been vacant as a result of teachers not taking the vaccine.
Minister King admitted there are some subject areas where the ministry is having challenges finding teachers.
We either cover them through replacement teachers or through redeployment. But of course, there are some subject areas in certain areas, communities, if you like, that would have been difficult to find someone immediately. And again, I take, for example, Union Island, where clearly, not so much social studies, but we certainly had a challenge in finding someone to teach the history. Spanish, again, I mentioned the whole idea about the foreign languages being a challenge, even in normal circumstances. So again, we had issues with those. But as I'm saying, we have in fact been making that effort through redeployment to have these classes covered.
There has been a significant decline in teenage pregnancies in SVG. This is according to the Executive Director of the SVG Planned Parenthood Association, Odinger Louis Warner, and nurse Sue-Ann Matthews, who attributes the decline to several factors.
Teenage pregnancy has dropped from 15% to 9.8%, and this is great news. And I think one of the major contributing factors to this, it would have been the epidemic, and because of such, there's no time for idle doings.
First, I would say I believe it's education, because I think our young people are more aware and they have a hope that after I've left school, then I can go on to university. But now, having seen a lot of people go off to study and everybody is talking about their bachelors, and our young people are more aware that there is more to education than secondary education. I believe part of it can be to the pandemic, because our children were at home for about a year and a half, and where they will be more protected, in my opinion, because they're at home with parents, and they spend less money. Money is one of the things that I think contribute to young people getting into trouble.
Louis Warner said it seems that some teenagers are coming to the realization that having another person to take care of while in school is a major responsibility that they are not yet ready for.
They would have had on their hands, they would have had more time to self-reflect and what they might have wanted for the future, what they want for themselves, and things like that. Because I know over the past couple of years dealing with teenage pregnancy, we've talked about it, we've had people sharing their stories, and what oftentimes come about is the responsibilities that comes with being a teenage parent. Your life practically goes on hold because you now have somebody else to look out for. You have somebody else you have to care for. So now you have to put yourself on the back burner, your academics on the back burner, your entire future on the back burner. Despite the fact that now, because of the educational revolution, that it permits us to continue our education after pregnancy, I think because most of the time that also in itself being a teenage mother and going back into school has its own stigma, it tends to prevent our young people from making that step of re-engaging into that academic field of building their self-adequate capacities.
Nurse Matthews took the time to encourage teenagers who are battling with their hormones or those who would have already gone through a pregnancy and feel lost to get in touch with the SVG Planned Parenthood Association for guidance.
As a nurse, and I see our young people do struggle, and sometimes they don't get the information at home. I would say the internet is available. You could always seek. Sometimes they're afraid of speaking to an older person for fear of judgment. And I think that's one of the problems that we really have. If you're not comfortable with the nurse in your community, you could always come to Planned Parenthood, because we not only have nurses here, we have also counselors who are willing to assist in whatever area we can. So I would say to them, before you make any decision, the information is available to you. You could always come to us, because if you could always come here to ask what is happening and why is this happening. In our setting, we do not judge. When you come, we open ourselves. We open ourselves to assist you, to empower you. One of the greatest thing about here is empowering our women to make the best decision. So you come and you speak with us, it's not a problem. You speak with me as a nurse, it's not a problem. So I would tell them to seek counsel, speak to, if you speak to an adult. That's what we've been saying over the years. If you think you cannot trust that adult, look for somebody who you can trust to help you.
Members of the public, particularly pregnant women, are being advised to monitor their daily salt intake. This advice comes from the nurse in charge of the Chateaubelair Health District, Shelly-Ann Ross, who was speaking on NBC Radio today in commemoration of Salt Awareness Week, observed under the theme, Shake the Salt Habit. Ross noted that eating foods with less salt can lower blood pressure and therefore lowers the risk of complications during pregnancy.
Pregnancy is so different with a lot of persons. Of course, we would advise persons to eat a lot of fruits and vegetables. That goes without saying, even if you're not pregnant. The oily and the salty and the too much sugary brings with it its own complications. So we advise persons to, yes, you may eat, but do not overdo it. Some persons may not have that appetite to eat. Some persons may be vomiting. So that may be, in terms of them figuring out what to eat, that is a different story. But we encourage persons to eat as healthy as possible. Your nuts and your grains, whole grains and nuts, your fruits and vegetables, starch and especially the processed starch like bread and pasta and all of that, you want to go as easy on those as possible. Even though you need your starch on board for energy, you still have to go in moderation.
Nurse Ross also encouraged persons to drink their regular intake of water to stay hydrated, which is 8 glasses per day.
And of course, hydration is important. I know a lot of persons who don't like to drink water, and everybody wants to drink juice, and juice is fine, fruit juice of course, but water is important to stay hydrated.
SVG's ambassador to Venezuela, Andreas Wickham, was recently awarded a national honor by Venezuela on completion of his term of duty in that country. The Francisco de Miranda Award was conferred on Ambassador Wickham at a ceremony to mark the end of his 10-year assignment in Venezuela. The award is conferred by Venezuela on outstanding citizens or foreigners who have contributed to the sciences, the progress of the country, to the humanities, or who have exemplified outstanding merits. It was personally conferred on him by Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. President Maduro was full of praise for the work of Ambassador Wickham and his wife, Yvette, for the role they played in strengthening the relationship between Venezuela and SVG. He also lauded Prime Minister González and the Vincentian people for their consistent solidarity with Venezuela. In thanking President Maduro, Ambassador Wickham said that Venezuela is a friend of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a loyal ally that has maintained in difficult times.